A family desperate for finding a home, a horrifying sickness that takes over in the most haunting occurrences. They had no idea about the evil that was lurking. Alan and Carmen Snedeker were trying to find a new place to call home after their son, Philip, had been suffering with cancer, trying to seal the deal on a place near Yukon Hospital where he had been going to get his treatments. They ended up finding a 5-bedroom home in June of that year and would move in with their daughter and 3 sons. The house that they bought had a very dark and twisted past that had begun already manifesting right under their noses that would soon open up a can of worms that they were not prepared for. One of the family members stumbled upon something completely morbid that sent chills down their spine. Carmen was searching around the corners of each room in the house, like the basement. Well, in there, she found something deeply disturbing. As she made her way one step at a time down the staircase, what she saw down there was a large group of old boxes and furniture that had already been there, covered in dust. As she started to open each and every box, she ended up finding items used in funerals and mortuaries. She described the entire basement to be full of these objects, embalming equipment, tools in general used by morticians, coffins in the darkest corners of the room, even gurneys. And what she soon realized was that this wasn't just a basement to a home, but instead a lower level to the house that they'd bought, which was formerly a funeral home. This struck Carmen in ways that made her regret every single decision that they had made on thinking that they were finally at peace as a family. She immediately called the previous owner, Daryl Karn, who had sold them the property, and asked him what was going on. And he did indeed confirm. The house was once used for the dead, called Halahan Funeral Home. He explained to her that the entire property's existence was in operation for decades, and it was used to embalm bodies and process deceased corpses for funeral ceremonies. He even told her that he had told her this before they'd purchased the house. But she knew that that conversation never happened. And now they were too far into a decision that they'd made that they couldn't come back from. She was quoted in this story explaining that there was no way that she could have known about this situation because not only did her and Daryl never have a discussion about it, but when they bought the house, well, the basement was blocked off by the previous builders that were working on it before they had even purchased it. So when she went to the basement herself, she was the one to peel off the wooden barricades that were nailed into the entrance, slowly creeping in to try and figure out why it was sealed off to begin with, and she simultaneously opened up a path to dark presences, but she didn't realize that. But this wasn't all that they had found while uncovering the mortuary equipment. It was just a dent in the morbidity that had been left there. While she was sifting through some of the smaller boxes, in those she found printed Polaroids documenting the deceased corpses that had been in there. Guys, we're talking literal pictures of people's faces, their cold, lifeless body parts, stacks of these images left there by the previous morticians. She explained that in each of these boxes, there were not only photos of the corpses, but there were also toe tags and head tags of the names of these people. Along with that were items, personal belongings that these people owned while they were still alive. The family as a whole, well, they couldn't really do anything about how dark and gruesome the entire situation was. All they really could do was continue settling in. That's at least what Bradley and Philip ended up doing, and they even took it a step further. They started setting up the basement as their new bedroom. Maybe they took it as a creepy, entertaining opportunity. How would you feel about sleeping in the same basement where dead people used to be? Because they ended up choosing to sleep in some of the caskets that were still displayed in a room across a dark hallway from the embalming room. Things suddenly got a whole lot worse for the family, and it might have even been because of Bradley and Philip once they decided to start interacting with objects in the basement like those caskets. Well, this seemed to have unleashed from the depths of hell some sort of demonic presence. The entire family started to feel random cold spots just from roaming around in various areas of the house. Odd noises like tapping or scratching on the walls. Even some of the lights started to flicker out of nowhere, even though all of the bulbs were newly replaced and nothing was wrong with the electrical wiring. While Philip was in the basement with his brother one night, he was documented to have abruptly started to act very unusual for how Bradley knew him to be. Weird characteristic changes in his personality that made him seem very strange to his brother. And for Bradley, this was a signal that, well, he was acting like a completely different person, like as if he had been taken over by someone else. Soon after that, they began attending their local Catholic church in an effort to give themselves a peace of mind and sort of bless themselves from whatever they were experiencing. And, well, Carmen even had started talking to the priest about experiences that the family had been going through in that house. One of the occurrences that Carmen had been complaining to the priest about was when she was in the shower one night and she started to get attacked by some evil, malicious, and invisible presence that had begun scratching her, and she couldn't do anything about it. And simultaneously, in another room at the same time, Tammy was victimized. Her blanket started floating up in the air off of her bed, and random objects around her room began shifting, and nothing was even touching them. According to the complaints that were made to the church, parts of their experiences were even correlating with dark figures, ghosts, and embodiments that had been seen roaming around the hallways and inside their basement. Eventually, that same priest that Carmen had spoke to wound up connecting the family with none other than Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigators that have hundreds of cases about hauntings, ghosts, and deadly occurrences from all around the world. And the worst possible news for their family? Well, the Warrens explained to them that as soon as they had stepped onto the property, even from the outside, that Lorraine felt resistance from a dark presence that had long since already attached itself to that house. A couple of days after Ed and Lorraine had been staying there in the house with the family to pursue their investigations, Bradley explained to everyone that he had been harassed by an entity, a young man with long black hair that reached down to his hips, who would taunt him on a daily basis, sometimes even threaten him and call him by his name directly. But even with the Warrens there, paranormal experts who, if anyone else, they could fight off any ghostly entities, it was already too late for this family, and the hell had been unleashed all around the house. It was too much for anyone. And for Carmen especially, well, she was mopping the floors one day while Ed and Lorraine were across in another room, and they were all interacting with each other. But while she tried to shift the bucket from one side of the room to the other, they all saw a pool of blood spewing out from the bottom of the mop bucket, almost like a waterfall onto the floor, this deep red color. And along with that deep red was the smell of rotting flesh. Carmen was terrified and stepped back, screaming. Then, as Ed and Lorraine began looking further into their investigations within the basement, Lorraine started laying her hands on a lot of the objects in there. First, she started with some of the boxes, then it was some of the caskets, then it was some of the photos. She wound up connecting with the evil presence that was in there and got vivid glimpses of the house's past, decades before, and it began to shed some truth on why the family was experiencing these ghostly presence, these terrorizing moments of hauntings and figures that were tormenting in multitudes of ways. Lorraine explained to them that one of the funeral workers who did the embalming of the corpses didn't just process the bodies for funeral ceremonies, but also performed necrophilia on many of the corpses, the same corpses that were in those photos that Carmen had found in the boxes. This is potentially what started triggering the dark and haunted energy once the family started interacting with things around the home. It's what Ed and Lorraine believed, well, invited all of the dark entities to start harassing the family. Eventually, the Warrens brought in 2 priests from that same local Catholic church so that they could perform a mass blessing and exorcism on the entire property. And meanwhile, Ed and Lorraine Warren were still there to help assist them, and while the priests were going throughout each individual room, an evil presence gave Ed Warren a heart attack. After the exorcism had finished and everything had since settled, well, the Snedekers family moved out and never looked back. The home and property itself became this famous phenomenon for what Ed and Lorraine would go on for one of their cases, and it even became a movie all about it called The Haunting in Connecticut.